Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is Dr. Ahmad Al Faris. Today we are going to talk about a new thing, a new application about forces, which called moment and turning effect. Now, all of us, we know what's the meaning of moment or what's the meaning of turning effect. In American, they call it torque. Okay, we have to know the ideas about how we can find the moment and how we can use it to reduce the force to make more work. Okay, طيب. First of all, لما نيجي نحكي عن التيرنينج افكت لازم يخطر ببالك كثير ideas كثير examples about ايش المومنت. اوكي first of all اذا في حدا بده يضرب واحد اوكي بالافلام الامريكيه بيجي بيحكي له you slap like a girl. بيجي بيحكي له you slap like a girl. شو الفرق بين الشاب لما يضرب بوكس مثلا والصبيه؟ مع احترامي للصبايا، في صبايا ما شاء الله عندهم بوكس من الاخر. So what the main difference between male and female punch or slap? Okay, الidea, yes, في ناس بلش يبعدوا. It's not that hard. Okay, why? The idea that, for example, if a girl wants to slap someone, she will do like this. But if a boy wants to slap, he will what? He will use the whole what? The whole what arm. So what's the difference between this and that? Okay. Who can tell what are the main difference between like moving the arm like this, okay, or moving the whole hand or the whole arm like this, move it away from the body? Maybe it will be the same force, maybe the same muscles, but more, not force, more moment. More moment. Why more moment? Because I'm using what? Because I'm using longer distance. I want from you to prepare yourself, prepare your notebook and your worksheet, okay, to write together some information about moments, okay? First example, I will mention it, is the spanner. Do you know the spanner? Okay, the spanner, they use it to tie, for tightening what? Or losing nuts, okay, or screws, okay? They help to produce a large turning what? Effect. How this happened? Now we know that if this is a nut, okay, and I have, let's move on to talk about the moment quickly, okay, then we will talk about it slowly with more details indirectly, okay? So if I have this, okay, spanner, as you know it, okay, tamam, or they call it wrench in American, but this spanner in British, okay, I want to make it rotate. If I want to make it rotate in this direction, where is the pen? If I want to make it rotate in this direction, okay, this direction, what do we call this direction? Is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? What do we call this direction? Is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? Look to your watch and you decide, is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? Yes, صبايا بعتوا لنا والشباب, yes, it's clockwise. So if I want to make like this, okay, that means I will make a force act. Where's my force? ليش مش مبين هذا؟ okay, hey, force. I'll make the force act on the edge of it going downwards like this. Okay, so this is the point where, okay, this is the point where the center of rotation we call pivot. Okay, this is the point of rotation we call pivot, and this is the perpendicular distance to my force. Okay, this is the perpendicular distance. As you can see, this distance is a huge, okay, to my what force. خلينا نظبط حرف الدي. Okay, okay, if this distance is a huge, this is a perpendicular distance between my force, okay, this is F, okay, that means I'll rotate it easily, okay, in this direction. But if I put my hand half the way of the spanner, do you think that I will use greater force or smaller force? I will use what? Greater force or smaller force in this situation? I will use what? Larger force. Why larger force? Because the distance in this situation is what? Smaller to the center of the pivot. Exactly, greater force. So what that tells us? That this moment depends on two factors, the force, okay, and the perpendicular distance, 90 degrees to the force, perpendicular distance. And what it can tell us? Is it easier to use a longer spanner or shorter spanner to make this rotation? Tell me, is it easier to use a longer spanner or yes longer. شكرا يا هنا. شكرا يا صبايا آلاء وفرح اللي عم بيجاوبوا وأنا وهنا. Okay, so whenever the spanner is longer, شكرا يا يوسف, برافو عليك. So whenever the spanner is longer, the arm of the person, the boxer is longer. Okay, he has wider shoulders, greater arms, okay, longer hands. He will punch more, slap more. Okay, tamam. That's why. Okay, we are talking about what? About a moment. So the moment depends on two factors. What are they? The moment they use capital M or tall, like this symbol to represent it, doesn't matter. Okay, represent by two factors. What are the force multiplied by what? The perpendicular what? Distance. So yes, exactly. Thank you. So what is the unit of the force يا شباب صبايا? What is the unit of the force? The unit of the force. حكينا وخلصنا عنها درسناها كامل الفورس. What's the unit of the force? The unit of the force is a Newton. What's the unit of distance? The unit of distance is meter. So what will be the unit of moment or the turning effect? Yes, what will be the unit of moment? يلا جاوبوني. Newton per slash Newton per meter. Do we divide or multiply? Exactly. Newton dot meter. Newton dot meter. No problem عادي. Okay, so Newton dot meter is the unit of what? Moment. هيك على السريع شو هو المومنت. Okay, وكيف we can compare between a small moment when it's the same moment, sorry, same moment but different distances, so we can use a smaller force or what? Larger what? Force according to the distance that we use it. So one of the machines, the simplest machine that we use it is the lever, okay, to hold or to lift something or like a rock. Okay, whenever the arm of the lever, okay, or the stick is longer, it's okay, or the gear or the jack to or the wrench to lift the car is longer, okay, it will be easier to what? To lift it. Okay, so I'm talking about the same moment here but different forces and different distances. So that, for example, here, if the first situation it was 20 Newton multiplied by, for example, the whole length of the spanner is 30 centimeter. If I put, okay, 15 centimeters, okay, so let's say 15 centimeters, I convert it to into meters. The force that makes the same moment should be what? 40, twice. تمام? Okay, good so far. خلينا نمشي with more details. So, what are the two factors that makes the moment greater? Who can tell me what are the two things that makes the moment greater? Yeah, send me the answer. Yes. What are the two factors that, yes, the distance, the perpendicular distance, that's number one. And number two, ايش? Number two, يلا جاوبوني ابعتوا لي. Yes, Yusuf, شكرا لك, شكرا يا هنا, شكرا يا ماي, the applied force. So from that, okay, the longer the spanner, the greater the turning effect, the moment, okay, شكرا يا آلاء. That's number one. So the longer the spanner, or the longer the arm that, or the longer the distance, okay, the greater the turning effects, that's number one. Number two, the greater force, the greater turning effect. يعني for example إذا بدي أفتح جرة الغاز في بلدان عندهم جرات الغاز بالسبانر بستخدم فتحها وإغلاقها. إذا أنا بدي أفتحها ولا أسكرها غير لما أخوي أو ابني الصغير يفتحها ويسكرها, الفورس تبعته غير عن الفورس تبعتي. Okay, so that's what are the two factors, the distance and the force. The distance, perpendicular distance, and what? And the force. طيب خلينا هلا نشوف كيف الأسئلة الامتحان IGCSE about what they are focusing. Okay. Now example for turning effect. أعطوني examples for turning effect. أنا أعطيتكم أول example اللي هو السبانر. You can tell me now other examples. يلا. Send me on chat. Another spanner. Another examples. Door handle. Bravo. صح. Another example. Yes. Seesaw. Oh, bravo يا آلاء. Another example. Seesaw, the play. Seesaw. Okay, what else? Another examples. يلا شباب ابعتوا لنا. برشلونة راح ميسي منكم. يلا ابعتوا لنا answers. تمام. أنا طبعا بحب لعب برشلونة. بحب ميسي وخسارة إنه طلع بس يعني هذا نصيب. يلا give me answers. Opening a lid. Yes, whenever the like this one, whenever it's wider, it will be easier to open it. Okay. تمام. شكرا. تمام. Okay. خلينا أنا أعطيكم examples. We have too many examples here. Okay. في ناس بلشوا. Okay. البالانس. Yeah. Two pan balance. Yes. Two pan balance. It's yes. وفي كمان واحد بعت لنا هلا جواب. Exactly. So I want from you to write an examples, okay, for like the wrench that they use it to tie or untie the screws of the wheels of the car, okay, the doors or the door handle, okay, the hinges, as you can see, they are in one side, okay, these are the pivots, okay, and the handle of the door, it will be as far as possible. So if I want to close the door, I push it in this way with a small force. If it's in the middle, I will push it with a greater force. If it's in very close to the hinge, I will push it with a huge force, and maybe I will not close it. Okay, so whenever the door is wider, okay, I will use less turn force to make the same turning effect to close it according to the distance away from the hinges. So that's why we a longer hinge, okay, wider door. The same thing for scissors. Whenever the arms of the scissors is longer, I can cut more easily, okay, and okay, the same thing for nuts breaker, okay, I can hold it from the edges from here, okay, and I can break it much easier than when I hold it by my hand, or I use my hands to open it. It's difficult, okay. Let's see. So as you told me, as you can see, look here, the girl, she's sitting far from the point which is the pivot. We call this point as the pivot, and that's her weight acting down. And this man is his weight, which is much greater, okay. He's sitting closer to the pivot. This is the distance to the pivot here. So the distance of the boy is much smaller than the distance of whom? The distance of the girl. And this is the weight of the girl. So that means the weight of the boy multiplied by the distance of the boy must equal the weight of the girl multiplied by the distance of the girl. But if the boy is sitting here, تعرف شو بصير؟ بتطير البنت. Okay, she moved very far, okay, because what? Because he caused a huge moment greater than her weight to balance it, okay. So these are the things that some examples, okay, more mass, yes, exactly. These are the more weight, more force, okay. These are the examples for the moment. Okay, now we have moment and center of mass. Today we are going to talk about both of these things, moment and center of mass, okay. Now, first of all, to understand the moment, we have to know something called equilibrium. When we say that we have an equilibrium object, okay, that means we have two meanings for this, okay. That means the object is balanced, okay, and it means that the object is stable. When we say that the object is in equilibrium, we have these two conditions, balanced and stable. That doesn't mean that any balanced object is stable, and that doesn't mean any stable object is balanced. But when there's an object which is in equilibrium situation, it will be balanced and stable. This word includes both of these words, okay? Type. What do we mean by balanced object? When we said balanced object, we have to understand that the resultant force is equal to 0, as we said before. طب شو يعني resultant force is equal to 0? That means the forces up is equal the forces down. حكينا هذا الحكي before, and the forces left equal the forces were right. يعني when they say that any equilibrium object, we have to understand these things. هدول الشغلات هم اللي حنستخدمهم بالفورمولا. هدول القوانين تبعتنا بالدروس. يعني احنا عندنا one of the formulas about درس المومنت اللي هو هاي الفورمولا, forces up equal forces down, or forces right equal forces left. That's the first situation because it's balanced. The second equation and the second situation that we are going to do the question by to answer it, it's a stable. That means the resultant moment equals 0. What do I mean by resultant moment equals 0? That means the total moment on this object is equal 0 about its pivot. So that means, okay, that means the total moment clockwise, the CW means clockwise, equal the total moment what? Anti-clockwise. So all the moments that acts on a certain point, on a certain pivot, on a certain object, okay, clockwise, they have to make the total moment that acts anti-clockwise to make it what? Stable, doesn't rotate. Okay, and if it's stable, does not rotate, that means it might be equilibrium. But if it's equilibrium, it will be stable and it will be what? Balanced. Tamam? Good so far? If you please write these down. Is this helpful? اللي شايف انه هذا الحكي helpful، سوري، اللي مش شايف انه هذا الحكي helpful او مش فاهم عليه كثير هذول التو فورمولاز اللي بدنا نشتغلهم، يرفع لي ايده او ايش يسال سؤال، يبعث سؤال اللي انا مش فاهم. تمام، اوكي، فريدي رفع ايده، يعني في نقطه مش واضحه له. طيب مره ثانيه فريدي، احنا لما نقرا اي سؤال انه عندنا ايش object is equilibrium، شو معناته؟ معناته الاوبجكت is balance او الاوبجكت is what stable. تمام. فعندي انا باي سؤال له دخل بالمومنت، لما يحكي لي كلمه equilibrium حيخطر بالي انا تو فورمولاز. ايش الفورمولا الاولى؟ انه resultant force equals zero، that means forces up equal forces down، او forces right equal forces left. هاي الفورمولا الاولى to start answering the question. السكند فورمولا اللي هي المومنت clockwise equal ايش؟ المومنت anti clockwise، واحنا حكينا دائما المومنت equal الفورس multiplied by the distance to the pivot. البربنديكولار distance، هاي الساين معناتها perpendicular distance to the pivot. اوكي، كيف بيبين معنا هذا الحكي انه فهمناه ولا لا يا صديقي يا فريدي وكلياتكم؟ طبعا انه لما نبلش نحل اسئله حتشوف انه احنا هنستخدم these two laws only. اوكي تمام. good. okay, the resultant force means moving in opposite direction, right؟ لا، resultant force total forces act on the object، يعني في مثلا weight، في normal reaction، في pulling force، في pushing. هلا حنفرجيكم ايش شويه اسئله. اوكي تمام. اوكي خلينا نمشي هلا شوي. اوكي نروح على الورك شيت if you please. بالورك شيت هون زي ما انتم شايفين انا سايب الصفحه الاولى فيها ايش؟ فراغات وكتابه. هدول الفراغات والكتابه بدنا نكتب ايش؟ شويه examples على الموضوع المومنت. اوكي، ولسه ما بلشنا نحل اسئله. اول شيء بدنا نعطيكم اياه اللي هو مثلا فور اكزامبل، اذا انا كان عندي ايش؟ نوت. اوكي هيها زي النوت اللي قبل شوي حكينا عنها رسمناها. واي نيد وات ا سبانر، وهلا بنمسك هاي سبانر. خلينا نغير اللون. اوكي، وهذا السبانر اوكي like this. هلا هاي السبانر if I use a force that acts on this edge here, my force will be small. Why my force it will be small? Because the distance that I use it to what? To act from the pivot of this force to make the object rotate, it's what? It's a huge. This distance is what? Is a huge. But if I start to rotate this spanner by a force which is closer to the pivot, this point, the pivot, okay, the point of rotation, that means I will use what? A greater force to what? To rotate it, because I'm what? I am at a closer distance from where? From the pivot. I'm with a closer distance, small distance from the pivot. Now both this force and this distance, this force and this distance, maybe they make the same turning effect. The same turning effect clockwise, the same moment clockwise. But the force here is smaller because force multiplied by the distance, which is big, equal the force here, which is big, multiplied by what? Multiplied by the distance, which is what? Small. So the moment, we can write it down as definition. What's the definition of moment? Write with us لو سمحتوا. The turning effect. لو سمحتوا اعملوا لنا ميوت. في حدا فاتح السماعة. اوكي شكرا انه عملت ميوت. يس يسلم ايدك. اوكي the turning effect of a force multiply by its perpendicular distance to the pivot. To the pivot. So what is the formula here? The formula here, moment equal force multiplied by what? Perpendicular distance. And we have to know that the distance in meters the force in Newton, and the moment is what? Newton dot meter. Good so far? تمام. Write these down if you please. Write these down. The second thing that we are going to write it اللي هو كتبناها هلا okay اللي هو كلمة equilibrium. Equilibrium. What does it mean? It means that the object is stable and the object is balanced. And we say that stable means resultant moment equal 0. So that means moment clockwise or total moment clockwise equal total moment anti-clockwise. Here balance means the resultant force is 0. And we said that about resultant force is 0. That means the forces upwards, forces up equal forces down. That is the most formula that they ask about it. And the other formula, forces left equal forces right. Forces left is equal to the forces what? Right. Tamam? Write these down or take a screenshot now and write it later. But you have to write it down. You have to write your own notes. Okay? You have to create your own notes لأن هاي أحسن طريقة للدراسة لإلكم. تمام؟ Third thing we have to write it down اللي هو السيسو. هلا when we talk about seesaw, هذا most important example because it's very easy to understand it. Okay, when we talk about the seesaw, we are talking about a beam or a plank, okay, that has a pivot, a point that it can rotate from its center. Okay, طبعا later on we are going to say why its center. Okay, تمام. Then we decide what are the forces and the moment clockwise and the moment anti-clockwise. For example, if this is the plank or the seesaw, forget my handwriting, my drawing. It's not that clear by this pen. Okay. تمام. If this is the seesaw and this is the pivot. Okay. And we have okay a small lady here. Okay, that's her hair. Okay, tamam. That she is, and that's her hands, her feet. Okay, okay, and we have a big person like me with a small belly. Okay, yeah, for example, she's 40 kilogram, I am 80 or 100 kilograms, so I'm twice her mass. Okay, that's me, and that's my belly. Okay, these are my hands, these are my legs. Tamam. Now, what are the forces acting here? What are the forces acting here? Now, as you can see, we have my force, my weight of the boy. And what else? Yes, shukran ya ala. We have her weight, the weight of the girl, okay, which is smaller. That's why I put it thinner, the weight of the girl. And we have the weight of the same plank itself, the weight of the plank, okay, the beam itself, WP, okay. Tamam. These are the forces downwards. Do we have forces upwards? Yes. The same support from the plank, from the pivot, acts upwards to hold everything, to hold the plank, to hold the person, the girl, okay. This is that called P, the pivot from the force or the pivot, okay, okay, and that acts upwards. Fine. So if we go to these formulas, we can use this one. And we can say that the forces up equal forces down. So that means P is equal to the weight of the boy plus weight of the girl plus the weight of the plank itself. Fine. What about the forces that causes moment? Now, as you can see, the pivot, it's here in the middle, okay? And both the pivot and the weight of the plank, because it's in the middle, we call it uniform plank later on, okay? We are going to explain what's the meaning of uniform plank. That means its weight acts exactly in the center. So the distance from the pivot to this force P, or the plank, the center of the plank to the pivot in the middle, it's 0. So both of these two, they don't have moment. Why the moment of the girl? Because she acts downward to the left of the pivot. So her weight, it's act as doing a moment, what, anti-clockwise about the pivot. Why the boy here, me, okay, acts in the opposite direction, because he is on the right on the hinge or on the plank, so he acts to make the rotation in this direction, what, clockwise. So that means I will use this formula to say that the force of the boy, which is the weight, okay, weight of the boy, multiplied by the distance of the boy, which is this distance from here to here, okay, from here to here, this is the distance of the boy, that's the moment clockwise, is equal the force of the girl, which is her weight, the weight of the girl, okay, multiplied by the distance of the girl, how far she is from the pivot, that's the distance of what, of the girl. And by using these two equations, this one, forces, and this one, moment, we can find anything they ask about it. Usually they don't ask to use both equations in one question, one part of the question. Maybe part A, find the distance, or find the moment, or find whatever, and part B, find one of the forces, or the weight of the plank, or the hair weight, or whatever. Okay, so usually they get 2 to 4 marks here, okay, and another 2 marks on the forces. Okay, that's on the first page. I want to write it down, all of you. Okay, now after you finish writing, okay, or take a screenshot, okay, for all this information, we have to know how we can do these questions. You will see that these questions are repeated. These are your homework. Okay, I want from you to try to do it. Okay, question number 3, question number 4, okay, page number 2. These are the questions that you are going to do it as a homework. I'm going to answer it next time. Okay, we are going to answer it together next time. Tamam, let's move on to question number 5, page number 3. What they say? The figure below is in equilibrium. Aha. Equilibrium, it's our keywords that we are going to use it to explain balance and stable. Okay. By the weight W and the force 4 Newton acts here. So that means this ruler, this meter rule, it has the weight from the center. W acts downwards, and there is a pivot acts 10 centimeter mark, and on the 0 centimeter, there's 4 Newton. For example, this is the pivot, okay, and it has a weight from the center, but I'm acting by a small force like this. I'm sorry, where's the pen? Okay, so I'm trying to hold the pen, okay, like this, because if I remove this force, the pen will fall because of its weight, because the weight does not act in the center. So how much? Yes, thank you, Maya. What is the weight of the meter rule? Now we have to know that this is the pivot and this is the distance. We have to know that there is a moment in this direction, anti-clockwise, for the 4 Newton, and there is a force from the weight W acts in this direction, which is what? Clockwise. So the moment clockwise, which is force W, multiplied by the distance. How far from 50 centimeter mark from the center, because it's a uniform meter rule, from the center to 10 centimeter, how far it is? It's 40 centimeter, okay? It's not necessary to convert both sides from centimeter to meter, okay? Multiplied by the other force, which is what? 4 Newton, multiplied by how far it is from the pivot, which is 10 centimeter. Okay, not necessary to convert from centimeter to meter. Okay, so 50 times minus 10, it's 40. So 40 W equal 4 times 10, which is 40. Divide by 40, divide by 40. As Maya said, W equal how much? 1. And yes, شكرا يا مايا. So what we did here يا شباب, بنعيد مرة ثانية, بنحل السؤال مرة ثانية. احنا شو حكينا؟ عندنا forces up equal forces down. لسه في force here from the pivot acts up, okay, from the pivot P. We don't know how much it is and they didn't ask about it. Neglected. خلينا نمسحها. Okay. Now what they ask about to find the weight W, okay, of the meter rule, that it's balanced or stable or equilibrium by this force 4 Newton that act 10 centimeter away from the pivot. So we said that, okay, force, moment clockwise equal moment anti-clockwise about whom? About the pivot. This is the pivot. So the force multiplied by the distance to the pivot equal the force multiplied by the distance to the pivot. So the force to the right side, which is the weight W, multiplied by how far it's from here to here, how far it is. It's at mark 40 centimeter mark, and the pivot it's at 10 centimeter mark. So the distance 50 minus 10, which is 40 centimeter mark. It's not necessary to convert it into meters. Equal the force on the other side, okay, the anti-clockwise, which is 4 multiplied by how far it is from the pivot, which is 10 centimeter. And by using the formula, okay, using the calculator, the answer is 1 in Newton. So the answer is A. Shukran ya Maya. Thank you. Any question here? Is it clear? If you find it clear, raise your hand. If you find it clear and easy, raise your hand, because this question is not easy. Okay, if you find it easy, ها 2 رافعين ايديهم 3 رافعين ايديهم 4 في ناس بعتوا لي اوكي انه كلير. شكرا لكم. تمام، يسعدكم. تمام، هي فريدي هنا جانا اوكي احمد كل احمد رافع ايدك ولا مش رافع ايدك؟ حزعل يا احمد. فاهم ولا مش فاهم يا احمد؟ طيب اوكي شكرا فريدي. كيف الامور هلا؟ اوضح صارت شويه فريدي؟ اوكي ابعت لي لو سمحت اذا كانت واضحه ولا لا. اوكي، اذا حدا بيزعل ان انا بنادي اسمه يحكي لي، اني انا على البرايفت اني انا ايش ما بحبش حدا ينادي اسمي، ما عندي مشكله. question number 6 برضه هذا هوم ورك، حلوا لي اياه. question number 7 حلوا لي اياه هوم ورك. okay, you can do it, it's very easy. let's move to question number 8. question number 8 شو بيحكي لنا السؤال؟ The diagram shows a balance being used to find the weight of a baby. That's how they were using, not in this shape, but it's close to this shape, to find how much is the weight of the baby, the weight of the sheep during عيد الأضحى عشان نضحي فيه، بدنا نعرف قد ايه وزنه عشان ندفع فلوس. So they use this technique by moving the pointers, by moving the object or the weight to the right or to the side of the pivot, and moving the baby with the basket. Okay, so what they say, at equilibrium, they have to tell me this word. If they don't give us this word, I cannot answer this question. Okay, at equilibrium, the pivot is nearer to the weight W than the baby. They say that the W, it's closer to the pivot than the baby. The distance from here to here is much than the distance from the pivot to the baby, from the pivot to the baby. What is the weight of the baby? Now we don't have values in numbers to calculate, but what's the weight? Is it less than W, more than W, equal to W, or impossible to tell? Now some of you tell me that the answer is C, the answer is A, the answer is less, the answer is more. طيب خلينا ايش نعطيكم ارقام. Okay, let's give us some values. If the distance from here to here, let's say it's 20 centimeter. تمام? Yes, شكرا يا يوسف. And the weight here, for example, it was 5 Newton. تمام? And the distance from the pivot to the baby, let's say it's 50 centimeter. Okay? How heavy is what? Is the baby. So what we are going to say, we have two moments here. Okay? We have moment clockwise from the weight W, and we have moment anti-clockwise from the baby. So moment clockwise equal moment anti-clockwise. So moment clockwise, which is the force 5, let's say 50, it's a weight 50 Newton. Okay, so 50, okay, multiplied by the distance, which is 20, not necessary to convert it into centimeter, equal the weight of the baby W. We don't, okay, the weight of the baby, small w, okay, the weight of the baby acts here, it's small w, multiplied by what? The distance, how far is the baby from the pivot, which is 50. By using the calculator, The weight of the baby, it's what? 20 Newton. That means 2 kilogram. Okay. His mass is 2 kilogram. He is very small. Okay. So the answer here, is it more or less than W, which is 50? It's less. So the answer is what? Is A. Why it's less? Forget the calculation. Why it's less? Because the baby is farther. Whenever the baby is farther, his force, it will be what? Smaller. His force, it will be smaller to make the same moment as the weight W multiplied by what? Multiplied by the greater what? The smaller distance. So whenever the distance here is greater, the force is smaller. The distance here is smaller. The force here is what? Greater. Any question here? Any question here? واضح الأمور. Okay. If there's anything, you can send it to me on the private. Okay. تمام. على الواتساب. ما في مشكلة. Good. Okay. يا الله. نشوف هلا. أيوة. في عندي حدا هون بعت سؤال. تمام. كلير. شكرا يا آلاء. Okay. نشوف هلا. نكمل. Question number 9. Page number 4. In this question, what they ask? State. That means you already know the answer. State the two factors which, okay, the factors on which the turning effects depends, of a force depends. Number 1, شو رأيكم شو الجواب? The force. صح? How much is the force? Is it small or big? And number 2, أيوة. Number 2, the أيوة. Yes, شكرا. The distance. The perpendicular distance of the force from the pivot. The perpendicular distance of the force from the pivot. From the pivot. تمام? Good. It's easy 2 marks. طيب, next question, part B. في عنا 4 marks, 1 mark here, 1 mark here, another 1 mark here, and a 4th mark on triple I. اوكي, شوف يحكي لنا هذا السؤال. خلينا نركز فيه لو سمحتوا. دائما اقرأوا وحطوا هايلايت للبوينتس اللي احنا بدنا اياها. Forces F1 هيها and F2, this one. Forces F1 and F2 are applied vertically downwards, okay, at the ends of a beam resting on a pivot. لاحظوا البيفوت مش موجود exactly in the middle. It's on the left a little bit. Okay, so the pivot here acts. Okay, and we have force F1 and F2, and we have the weight of the beam. Okay, which is in the middle exactly, since it's uniform. They didn't tell us, but they show us. It's W downwards. So we have 2 moments in this direction, and we have 1 moment in this direction. So that means this force F1, it will be great to balance these 2, right? طب امسح هاي extra information. يلا ارجع مرة ثانية. So what they said, the beam has a weight W. The beam is shown as is shown in the figure below. First part, complete the statement. Complete the statement about the 2 requirements of the beam to be in equilibrium. In equilibrium, there must be no resultant, and there must be no resultant. What are they? There must be no resultant what? And there must be no resultant what? يلا ها. There must be no resultant force. برافو يا هنا. شكرا. مين كمان ها؟ There must be no resultant ايش كمان الثانية؟ There must be no resultant force, and there must be no resultant, شكرا يا آلاء, moment about the pivot. Moment about the pivot. شايفين ما أسهله؟ هل هذا سؤال past paper? Yes, it is a past paper question. طيب. Triple I. بس هذا core, but they repeat the same question in the extent. Double I. The beam in the figure is what? Equilibrium. The beam is an equilibrium. طيب استفدنا ولا ما استفدنا انه يكون equilibrium؟ بس حكى لنا كلمة حلوة. F is the force exerted on the beam by the pivot P. Okay, في عندي force F from the pivot up وعندي الفورس F1 F2 والweight W. okay, but for it to be stable the resultant moment needs to be 0. yes of course عشان هيك كتبنا هيو there must be no resultant moment above the pivot. yes تمام. so complete the following equation about the forces on the plank. F equal ايش؟ هاي الفورس F equal what? Who can tell me this force equal what? The force upwards equal what? The forces were downwards. So what I have to say here, it's equal to F1 plus F2 plus what? W, right? It's equal, this force F acting upwards, it's equal to what? F1 plus W plus F2. The forces up equal the forces down. تمام؟ okay تمام. okay نشوف والله. okay good. So that's about what? The forces up and the forces down. Triple I, نخلص السؤال. Which one of the four forces, which one of these four forces does not exert a moment about P? مين رأيكم؟ مين الفورسز اللي does not make a moment؟ هو فورس واحدة about P. مين؟ Yes, F يا مايا, not W. Why? Because there's no distance between the pivot and the force F. Why? There's a distance between here and here. There's a distance. So that means there's a moment clockwise and there's another moment clockwise by F1 and by F2 and FW. Why? There's a moment anti-clockwise, balance them from F1. So maybe this one is greater than both of them. Not maybe, for sure, but they didn't ask about calculation. So this question only asks about the concepts. So the answer is what? F. Okay. تمام. So هيك بنكون حلينا السؤال على السريع مرة ثانية هيك revision له. What are the two factors that the moment depends on? The force and the perpendicular distance. We have to write perpendicular distance. Okay. And next, what are the two requirements to make in equilibrium? There must be no resultant moment and no resultant what? Force. Sometimes they write moment about the pivot, sometimes they write the word moment. احنا لازم ما نكون بخيلين ونكتب الجواب ايش؟ كامل. Next, شو بيحكي لنا؟ انه because it's in equilibrium, how continue the equation? F is equal. F اللي هي الفورس upwards equal the forces downwards. F1 plus W plus F2. Then which one of these four forces does not exert a moment about P? Because the pivot is P, so any force act on P, which is F, does not make what? A moment. So